Hello, Dr. Hassan Harris here from Citizens Committee for New York City. Really glad that you're joining us for this COVID conversation. As we think about where we are, we named this COVID conversation because we wanted to acknowledge the moment that we're in. But right now, we're actually thinking of this as a rebuilding conversation because it's people like you, leaders that are on their block in communities that are going to rebuild New York City and make sure that she's better than ever before. Um, a huge part of rebuilding is making sure that everyone's counted, that we have the resources that we need. And we're really excited to have this conversation about the census in New York City and to make sure that everyone is counted and included. And we're really honored to have some great special guests that are going to talk about the census efforts in New York City and some people on the ground that make sure that everyone's counted. Now, I believe I'm going to ask you to take out your phone if you're not already on it and to point it at the screen. That is a QR code, and the magic through new technology. If you have your camera open and point at that QR code, that will take you to our newsletter and how you can access it. We want you to access it because Citizens Committee for New York City is about bringing people together so that they can improve the city. And that's about having great information and access to resources. And that's what our conversation is about today. So I believe I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've done through a couple of slides. New York City is our neighborhood is one of the slogans that my predecessors used. We did a recent survey of over 500 New Yorkers that are within our network, and 90% of the folks who responded to our survey had filled out the census. So we're really excited about the level of engagement. It seems that people who are leaders in a community are going out there and making sure that folks are filling out the census. But we also explored why the 10% who haven't filled out the census, why they haven't done it. And they acknowledge that the lack of information and understanding how important it is, their concern for their privacy and the privacy of their information caused them not to fill it out. Also, some didn't understand how it was relevant to them, and some didn't have access to a device that can get them on the internet to fill it out. So those are some of the reasons why people said that they haven't filled it out. We're really excited to be able to speak to Julie Menon, who can talk about her efforts to make sure that all New Yorkers are counted, to talk about some of the concerns, and also to talk about even access to devices and to the internet. So just a little full disclosure, if my internet gets wonky, I live up in Harlem, broadband needs to be in every community, and we make sure there's no digital divide. We need to make sure that everyone has the resources they need. But Julie, thank you for joining us, and we'd love to hear about all the things that you want New Yorkers to know about the census.
Well, Rashawn, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for all of your dedicated work. We so appreciate it in helping New York City to get the count out. So I'm going to give a brief overview of what our office is doing, and then I'm actually going to turn it over to Allison Tarek on our staff to answer any questions, mainly because I will shortly be meeting the mayor in Brooklyn because we are going to be door knocking all afternoon. So in that spirit, I want to give a little bit of an overview of what we have done in New York City. So right now, New York City's self-response rate is 59.8, so we're almost at 60%. To put that into context, we're 6 points behind the nationwide average. In 2010, we were 14 points behind the nationwide average. So we've literally cut the gap almost in half, which is the good news. The bad news is that 40% of New Yorkers have still not filled the census out. And the further bad news is that President Trump has cut short the deadline to complete the census by 1 month. So it used to be October 31st. He's now cut the deadline to September 30th. There is a case challenging that. And there's actually a hearing happening later today challenging that. But we have to assume the worst case that the deadline stays of September 30th. And so we have basically 2 weeks to go to count 1.4 million households. Now, our team has phone banked. We've called over 3 million New Yorkers. We have sent text messages. These are individual texts, not robo-texts, individual conversations to 7 million New Yorkers. We have 34 different ad campaigns in 26 languages, featuring everyone from Cardi B to Alicia Keys to Lin-Manuel Miranda and many others. We've got a paid canvas operation. We're at food distribution sites. We're at subway stops. But look, we can't force New Yorkers to fill it out. It now is down to the wire, and now it has come to the point where we need every New Yorker to stand up and be counted. We have to remember what's happening here. President Trump's attempts to interfere with the census have been happening throughout the last year and a half. It's everything from trying illegally to add a citizenship question to the census. And I also work for the New York City Law Department. We're a plaintiff on the case and challenged that case along with others at the Supreme Court and won that case. But with that said, a lot of the damage has been done by the Trump administration to cause fear and intimidation around the census. We have to remember the census is safe, it's confidential, it's literally 10 questions, no citizenship question, 10 questions that take 10 minutes to fill out, and yet that affect the next 10 years of our city's future. I will say, for every New Yorker that simply says, I'm not going to be bothered with this, it's $2,700 per person or $7,000 per household. If you think
wow, say that again.
$7,000 per household. Okay. And we've got 1.4 million households. It's $10 billion. So really, for everyone that's listening to this, if you haven't filled the census out, you can fill it out while I'm speaking by going to my2020census.gov, my2020census.gov. You just put in your name and address. You can do it from any phone, any computer. You can do it from anywhere. You don't need to be in New York to fill it out. And for those New Yorkers that left the city, we need them to go online and fill it out as a New Yorker. That's so incredibly important because the numbers in certain communities where we think people have left New York are lower than they should be. So we really need to stress that point as well. Just go to my2020census.gov to fill the census out. What people can do that have already filled it out is go the extra mile, post on social media, send an email to every New Yorker you know saying, hey, have you filled this out? You might be surprised. You might assume that all your friends and neighbors and family members and colleagues have filled it out. Many have not. They simply haven't, and they don't know the new deadline is September 30th. So you'd be doing your civic duty and helping New York City in its greatest time of need by spending a couple hours today, tomorrow, the next day, really going through your own networks and pushing that message out and pushing the link my2020census.gov out. So I'm going to end on that note because I'm got to go to Brooklyn to door knock with the mayor. But I really want to thank you so much for having me. And Allison from our office is on to answer any questions you might have on the census. And thank you again for all of your great help.
Julie, you've been great. Thank you for being here for New York City. We appreciate you, and let us know if there's anything that we can do to continue to get the word out and be part of the rebuilding efforts that New York City is underway.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Great. So we would like to bring into our conversation some folks that are working on the ground, and also Julie mentioned one of her colleagues, Allison, from the census office that can answer specific questions that you have. So we're really excited about asking the South Queens Women's March co-founders to be part of our conversation. And Allison is also joining from the Office of the Census for New York City. So Aminta and Nirmala, thank you so very much for joining us. We're really excited to have you. And we're also very excited to have Allison. I wanted to start with your work on the ground, and I'll let Aminta or Nirmala start. Why is it important to get the word out? You care about a lot of different issues. Obviously, you're part of the Women's March, so it seems that you care about gender issues. But tell me, why anyone, no matter what they care about, should care about the census.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say thank you so much to Citizens Committee for New York City and to Dr. Rashan, to everyone part of Citizens Committee who believed in us enough for us to be a grantee. You were actually the first entity that believed in us enough to give us a grant. So we have been maximizing on the grant that you issued to us over the last several months. And I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the entire board of South Queens Women's March for that. So you mentioned why does it matter and what are we doing? We didn't start out thinking that we were going to be doing any of what we ended up doing over the last several months. To be honest with you, we saw ourselves as a connector to resources, but we became a provider of resources as a result of the pandemic. We were founded, inspired by global and national women's rights movements, and we're hyper-local, super local, specific to South Queens. We're an all-volunteer group, multi-generational, multiracial, intersectional. And our goal is to ultimately dismantle patriarchy and gender injustice in our communities. We wanted to take our sisterhood to the streets and to actually do a physical march. That did not happen in light of the pandemic. We had to shift what it is that we were going to be doing. And we had to strategize amongst ourselves and think about what it is that our community needed at this time, what it would mean to promote equity in our community. For us, that meant curbing food insecurity. So you'll see on the screen here, this is actually a photo from one of our essential giveaways where we give products to our community, including groceries, including menstrual supplies, including safe sex products. And notably for this conversation, at every single event that we have, there is a census component. The goal is to normalize the census in conversation to ensure that it's a part of conversation all the time. It's not something that is stigmatized, that our community members see as something they shouldn't do. And Nirmala will talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that we do face as a primarily immigrant community. But as what you see on the screen here is actually an event that we did in collaboration with the Caribbean Equality Project, which is a fellow partnering organization doing a lot of work in South Queens as well. We've had to be innovative about our approach, right? Because there are very limited ways in which you can engage with people over the pandemic. So what that means is meeting people where they are. And South Queens comprised of a lot of Caribbean immigrants. And so what you see here, Census and Chill, was our spin on an event that we did virtually where we included lots of community stakeholders, elected officials, musicians. We had a live DJ on set. It was really awesome. And the goal at the end of it all was to integrate Caribbean culture, but normalize, again, the conversation. We had an amazing 5-minute video that was produced by a local cinematographer from South Queens, featuring lots of familiar faces. So Julie Menon mentioned Cardi B and AOC. For our video, we had folks like Geeta Bisram from the Angels Caribbean Band, which is a local band. We had Sundari, the Indian goddess. We had local faces that people were familiar with, again, to do that destigmatizing. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Nirmala for a bit more about our work, if that's okay.
No, Aminta, I have a couple of questions, and then I want to get Nirmala in there for sure, because you dropped a lot of really big issues on the table, and I didn't want to run over them before we got into the very specifics of the census. So you mentioned, systems that can be oppressive. I'll use that language. And systems aren't people, so it's kind of situations that have certain groups of people not benefiting, certain groups of people kind of having a harder way to go. And so you said patriarchy. So when you say patriarchy, what does that mean to you? And talk to me about like how that affects people as they might do their work or how they show up.
Sure. So that's a loaded question. I'm gonna think about how to answer that question for a second. So I'll say this, right? So the very premise of our organization, South Queens Women's March, we are a women and gender nonconforming led organization. Oftentimes I'll say I'm Indo-Caribbean, right? And I grew up in a religious upbringing, and I didn't really see women as leaders in the spaces that I was a part of. And I didn't really feel comfortable having some of the conversations that we are building off of as a movement, right? And so when you're, for instance, with period supplies, right? This has nothing to do with the census, but you asked the question, so I'm gonna go down this path. But for period supplies, it's so moving to me when we have a grocery and food distribution to have women in our community, women and girls in our community, be able to go to a table and talk about what products they would like to see. We're destigmatizing things like menstruation in the process of doing all the work that we're doing. And so while again, with the pandemic, we've had to really reframe what we're doing. We are still very much inserting gender justice very intentionally in all of the work that we are doing. I'll also say that for purposes of the census, I know that a lot of our women were not counted last time. I know that a lot of children, babies, were not counted either. And so we've really been trying to advocate for every single person in a household to be counted. And again, that means everyone. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that completely answers my question, because before I asked, why does someone care about other issues? Why should they care about being counted? And I think you really eloquently said, and that your identity as a woman, an identity as someone who is Indo-Caribbean, and the different identities matter. And if you're silenced and if you're invisible, then people can't meet your needs and come to the table to provide resources for you. So in so much as you might need to go to a table and say, I need these resources as a woman specifically to be made whole and to be able to have opportunities, you need to be counted in the census so that folks can see and count and recognize how that need might be aggregated to, the neighborhood level, to the borough level, to the city level, to the country level. And I think people who are invisible don't have a chance to have a voice. And all the things that you said, I think, were really impactful and very specific in very useful ways.
I'll also have one thing to add just to what you just said about the invisibility. So data is really important, right? So data is super important. And when, as small nonprofit organizations, we're looking to grow, we're looking to apply for grants, and we don't have data to support how many people we're actually serving, it becomes that much more difficult to access those resources. Not everybody is like Citizens Committee and will identify that we're doing great work and believe in us and take a chance on us, right? So census data is tied to that as well. When we can identify how many people are actually there in our community, we can get that much more resources, both governmental and otherwise. So I just wanted to underscore that.
That's excellent. And Nirmala, Aminta said there are challenges to get people to, be counted and to come out. So if you could speak to some of those challenges, and I assume some of those challenges come from history that people have with institutions that weren't necessarily kind to them, or distrust. And so can you speak specifically about the challenges and how to overcome them?
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you so much for having me. And we're very grateful, as Aminta said, to Citizens Committee for all of your support since the beginning of our organization, for really believing in us. So to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've seen. So I will say, I think Julie put it very greatly, in regards to the setbacks that we've had for the census in our community regarding this administration and the ways in which the sort of fear rhetoric has been spread in regards to the citizenship question. And I do think that because that originally was put out there, I think our communities, while they may have been inclined to completing the census, because that language of their citizenship status and Queens being one of the most diverse boroughs here in New York City, and having folks from all over the world in different parts, and now like having that question on there, I think is like one of the biggest things, but also it brings it back to that accessibility piece, like not having access to different languages, maybe having access to an internet or computer. And I think for this community, the ways in which we've sort of try to adapt and make it so that everyone has access to things like that at all of our pantries. One thing that we started doing was putting the materials in the bags, but realizing that we had to take it a step forward. We had to be there and like maybe have folks on the ground with different languages, different language enumerators, have paper versions of things, and just like making sure that everyone feels. And I see the little banner. Yes, go to my2020census.gov. Another thing that we also did was put the phone numbers on there as well, because we do have a lot of folks from different generation and ages that might not necessarily know how to access that. So whenever we post all of our materials, we make sure to include both the website and the phone number. And so just that way, regardless of what age generation you're part of, you'll still have access to that. But I do think that our communities, our numbers in terms of response rate would have been a lot higher. Unfortunately, we've been set back from the beginning. And while Our response rate, I believe, for District 28 is currently at about 54 or 55%. We might have been close to that 90% mark, but we've had to, one, deconstruct all of the myths around the census that were first put out there and then get folks to complete the census. So I think I want to give a huge shout out to New York City Census, the US Census Bureau, and then all of the community partners that we've been working with. Y'all are doing such amazing work, but unfortunately we're at a setback at the beginning. So those are some of the challenges that I would say.
No, that's extremely helpful. Thank you so much for that. So you two are part of an organization that are, grassroots in the community, and the Census Bureau and city government. Those are institutions that are part of the system. So it's an opportunity for there to be a conversation with the system and community. And I wanted to bring Allison into the conversation of talking about, how does, local government, like how do institutions build trust and get great partners so that you can bridge that divide? And then also, where are some of the communities right now that you see the biggest needs and gaps? Because we want to call them out because Citizens Committee is across New York City. And if we can help highlight which communities that our leaders can step up and spread the word, then we'd love to target and be part of that process.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I know that Julie is not replaceable, but I'm happy to be here with you, and I'll do my best. And these two amazing women that are on the panel with me, thank you. I've been following your work, and I know that you guys have been working along with the NYC Census field team in Queens, and I've heard amazing things, and you guys have really knocked out of the park. So thank you. So my name is Allison Tarek. As Julie mentioned, I'm the grants director, and this question is actually specifically speaks to the work I'm leading, and I'm really happy to be able to answer it. So a really important piece for NYC Census 2020 when we were established last year was to ensure that we were truly on the ground in historically undercounted communities. And we knew that just having a bunch of government employees, whether they're city workers or US Census Bureau out on the streets, was not going to work for a lot of people in New York. So we were able to, through a partnership of this administration and the city council, receive $19 million, and we did RFP just about this time last year, and funded 157 community groups throughout the 5 boroughs. These grants went from $25K up to $250K, and they were, as I mentioned, in historically undercounted communities, and the groups have really done amazing work. Clearly, we had to pivot a great deal, as did my two partners on the phone, after COVID-19 became a reality, literally 2 days after self-response started in mid-March. But what's been really important to us was creating this grants program where we could do exactly what Rashawn just mentioned, building trust with community organizations, especially smaller groups that have not really worked with the city before. We thought it was really important that we fund groups. We had 3 tiers, small organizations whose organizational budget was as small as the award they were getting, 50K, 75K. And then, huge groups like FPWA that we're all familiar with in the city, Chinese American Planning Council, the big guys, United Way. But we made a concerted effort to fund very small, immigrant led, Black led, Native American led groups to ensure that every single New Yorker had someone that they could connect with. Obviously, we had to go virtual and online, but having folks that were truly on the ground and representative of the communities that we need to have counted, that deserve the money, the power, and the respect the census gives us, was so vital to the process and has really given amazing results. I mean, Rashawn, you mentioned what communities really need the help. And I'll say that, for instance, over the last 2 months, since we've been able to get back out on the streets while wearing masks and PPE, just like Amita mentioned, we've been doing census intake at food distribution centers and other locations. Corona and North Elmhurst, we've almost doubled the response rate out there since we've been working with local groups. I want to give a shout out to one group we've been working out with in the Corona area, Alianza, that works primarily with the Ecuadorian community. Also, we've been working closely with State Senator Ramos. And I have to say that right now, communities are responding, but as Julie mentioned, we're just short of 60%. So we need to keep getting out there. And I do want to say that, I'm sitting in my apartment in Brooklyn right now. Brooklyn has the lowest response of the 5 boroughs. Every borough has huge gaps of where we need to be responding. But Brooklyn and Queens has been really, you guys, I think it's these 2 ladies and all their partners in Queens have been, we've all been increasing each borough's response in the last few weeks, in the last couple months, but Brooklyn's really lagging. And there's a lot of communities here, Black communities and, immigrant communities that are really, there's a lot of fear. This presidential administration has been really feeding into that fear. And I just want to remind people, like Julie said earlier, that the census is safe and secure. It's private, no matter your status, you can complete it. And I'm so glad that, we have the organizations I funded, organizations that you all have funded, working in the field and making sure that people know it's safe and hearing it from people that look and sound just like them.
No,
Sorry, I know I went a little
that.
long.
No, that was actually,
really
you saved me the task of having to ask you a question about, like, if you're undocumented, what do you have to worry about? It's safe and secure, don't worry about it. You touched on one of the things that is definitely in the zeitgeist and in the airs, like with the murder of George Floyd and, Jacob Blake getting shot in the back. Black communities in particular have a big distrust, or a lot of the frustration and the tension of the decades, dare I say centuries, is building up and coming to a head right now. And so having partnership with institutions in this moment is difficult because trust needs to be built and there's a lot of healing that's needed, but it's necessary if we're going to get access to money, power, and respect, as you said earlier. So we'd love to, my colleague, Carla Naomi Rodriguez is going to hopefully ask some of the questions that we're getting from the folks on Facebook Live.
Hi, nice to be here. Just a reminder to anyone watching that you can post your questions in the chat. I do see one comment that could be a potential question. So someone said the census does not affirm the intersections of LGBTQ identities, which has been a barrier. Are there any ways that this has been addressed in the work that you are doing?
If I may, I'd love to touch on that and then throw it to my colleagues. So, obviously this was something that we were fighting for as a city. We think it's really important that all identities be like that. We're not all just male and female. One thing we are excited about is that you can mark your relationship of any nature with any member of any gender or sex. So that at least you can count your relationship. We know does not go far enough, and we've been fighting for it for several years now. And of course, it did not get counted because this administration has really tried to tamp down on any kind of free expression of how people live their lives and identify. So for us, we do want to ensure that people know that you can note any kind of relationship. That we feel is a slight win. But our goal is for 2030 census to make sure that all identities can be there. Obviously, you should identify if someone identifies as female, they should write female, even if maybe your government paperwork has not yet been updated to reflect that. So we say everyone should identify as themselves, but of course, there's a lot of feelings on our part that this does not get changed for the census, and we hope that you'll join us in making it happen for 2030.
Yeah, if I can chime in just a little bit. Hi, Mohammed. It's great to hear from you. So Mohammed Q. Amin, just a little plug. So he is the executive director of the organization we were talking about earlier, where we co-hosted the Census and Chill event. So just shout out to Mohammed. He does amazing work. And I want to say this about the census and why this question is important. So we need to, I'm not making this a political conversation. I mean, this is a political conversation. What am I saying? But political power is super important, and who we elect is super important. And unfortunately, I'll speak to South Queens, but there is a very, very valid argument to be made that South Queens is a gerrymandered area, right? Where the district lines are drawn in a way that disadvantages certain communities from rising in that way. And in order for us to change that, and in order for us to elect leaders who can advocate on our behalf for important policy issues like policy and human rights issues that Mohammed is flagging here, we need to complete the census, right? Because when when there is a conversation about redistricting, which always happens immediately after the census is completed, what they look at is census data. What elected officials look at is census data in order to redraw lines. So I say that because I think it's really important to connect the systems that we're talking about here to effect change and to advocate for what is right. So I just wanted to say that.
If I can make a comment to what you said is political, I would say that civic engagement in general is important to influence institutions. And the way we understand ourselves and the way we understand the world has evolved. I'm fortunate enough to be in a cross-cultural partnership. My wife is both Black and Latina. And I think there was a time when folks couldn't identify both of those in one space. And it took a lot of advocacy to make sure that the census could recognize that. I think, all of these are steeped in history and steeped in trajectories of the way we know ourselves and the way we know our world. And the only way to make institutions see us is by being engaged and advocating so that we can be seen. So I really appreciate this question, and I think it's really important. Carla Naomi?
Yeah, thanks. So we have another question, which you already touched upon a little bit, but someone's asking, how do you assure those who are afraid to enter the census, assure them that filling it out is not a risk? For example, like in case people are afraid that their information may be shared, etc.
Is this question for any of us?
Yeah, just feel free to jump in. Yes.
So I'll say, so from the South Queens perspective, a lot of community members ask this question of us, including when they're approached on our distribution lines by enumerators. I've had community members who didn't feel comfortable on that given day to complete the census for reasons related to immigration, reasons related to the place in which they live. They may live in basement apartments. Basement apartments are the choice of housing for so many immigrants from the countries many of us hail from, because there's no other affordable housing in South Queens, to be honest with you. And so oftentimes I may just talk to somebody on the side as a community member who they recognize and identify as somebody who they trust because they've known me for a given amount of time, and I look like them, I sound like them, I understand them, and basically saying that it is actually illegal for the government to use census information against you. It's actually law for this information to be safe and protected. It's unfortunate because oftentimes with the current federal administration, no matter what you say, somebody will still not feel comfortable because they believe that just given the rhetoric, right? But again, it's really about building that trust, building it from the ground up, and community member to community member. That assurity is super important.
Yeah, can I also just add, I think similarly to Aminta, like while we've been doing like these in-person outreach and distributions, I think things that we've been telling folks is, the data is just only used for statistics, but that those statistics are so important because that allocates the number of funding and resources that we get for our communities. So it's much more important for you to complete the census rather than not, because we're going to be losing if we don't count all the people that live in our communities. And I think when you break it down very simply, for regardless of who you're talking to, I think you can easily adjust. Like if you're speaking to a parent, you're like, this is, the number of schools or things that we're going to be able to build, or number of hospitals or roads. And I think depending on who you're talking to, it's easy to sort of make the situation like specific to that person, because I think the more personal you can break it down, it's easier for folks to sort of understand and like thing. I think it's really all about deconstructing like this whole myth that was created about why the census is like such a politicized type
deconstructing
of
the myth.
Yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I love this deconstructing the myth. Another thing that I sometimes note is, for instance, my parents are from Guyana, and a lot of the people that we serve are from Guyana. But I remind people sometimes that Guyana also has a census, right? So this isn't necessarily just an American type document. This is literally counting the people that are in a particular country, right? So I just remind folks of that, and also just making things tangible, right? So for instance, Liberty Avenue is where we do a lot of our work. Liberty Avenue, intersecting with Lefferts Boulevard in South Richmond Hill. And you know, we've experienced the sanitation issue along this avenue over the last several months during the pandemic, so much so that our local elected officials, namely Councilmember Adrienne Adams, asked us to collaborate with the community cleanup to clean up the avenue. And so we literally went out with brooms and rakes and did that. I say that because when you walk down Liberty Avenue, there aren't that many garbage bins. So you know, really making this tangible. If government doesn't the system in which we do live in right now, if they don't know that X amount of people live in an area, then they don't know that they need to put X amount of garbage bins on each block, right? We know how many people traverse this area, but it's not necessarily clear on paper. And so what happens is you see a sanitation issue. So it trickles down in all of these different ways, ultimately impacting community members. So really breaking that down. Why is it that we don't have community spaces? Why don't we have community centers? Why are many of our schools really struggling at this time? Why are they overcrowded? A lot of it goes back to our census data. So when you keep it real in that way, I think it further incentivizes community members to really get into their civic duty. Civic duty is not just voting. Anybody can participate in the census, regardless. So we've really been trying to champion that.
Excellent. Naomi?
Yes, I have a question. I think it's a question for Allison from Susan. She wants to know which groups in Brooklyn were funded for the project. So I'm sure there's a lot, but if you could give some examples.
And can I also interject? It'd be great for you to talk about groups like in Brooklyn that are funded for it, but also more broadly, can groups still access partnership with you if it's funding or otherwise? I think that'd be helpful for everyone to know.
Great. So it's a lot. It's 157 groups across the city. I would say the biggest chunk was in Brooklyn. It's the most historically undercounted borough, and as shown by the fact that we're still undercounted here severely. So I'd say it's probably in the 40 to 50 range. Some examples, big and small. Brooklyn NAACP, one of the bigger guys, a great, wonderful partner. And some of the smaller, Digital Girl, an amazing small nonprofit focused on teenage girls and teaching them how to code. And they made a census game online, and it's just awesome. So those are just two examples. Also, UJO of Williamsburg, just to show the breadth of the diversity. There's so many groups, it's hard to think off the top of my head, but those are three examples. And in terms of partnerships, so our funding ended for the census. The different borough presidents just gave out state money in the last 2 weeks. So that's closed out. So while we don't have funding, we are able to work together. One thing I've shared is that starting next Monday, we're calling it Countdown to Our Future. It's our days of action for the last 10 days of the census until from 9/21 to 9/30. There's only 13 days left as of now, less than 2 weeks. There is right now some stuff going on in the district and federal courts with an injunction, but we're focused on 9/30. It's our last day of census, so don't get too worried about that. But we're doing things in all 5 boroughs, and I want to welcome folks to go to nyc.gov/census. And also maybe I can talk to Citizens Committee. I know yesterday you guys sent out an email about the census. Thank you for doing that. I want folks to go online. I want you guys to sign up. We're doing phone banking every day. We're out there. We're doing census caravans. We have one, I believe, on Sunday in Richmond Hill. And we just did a huge event yesterday, 2 press conferences, one in Manhattan, one in Brooklyn, and then we'll be doing another one in Queens next week. Hopefully we'll be hitting Bronx and Staten Island as well. So you can join us phone banking, texting, in the field if you're comfortable. And also we have a wonderful field team. And if there's anyone here, either as individuals that want to sign up, something that I think Julie mentioned earlier, that Not all your friends and family have actually done the census. You think that they may have, but we're at 59.8% response, which means that they haven't. So something that's really important you can all do is literally just texting, calling your friends and family, your neighbors, and encouraging them to do the census. But I would love for you to join us in texting and phone banking over the next 2 weeks. And also, if any of you are part of organizations that perhaps weren't funded by us, Citizens Committee, or some other resource like New York Community Trust, etc., our field team, you can also sign up. I can share this with Citizens Committee. You could sign up to have some of our vols come, or we could connect you with the U.S. Census Bureau to have some of their census takers join you at one of your events if you need extra hands. So we're here to help. We are so excited that there's so many folks in here asking these important questions. Obviously, everyone's engaged, and it's just so great.
Great.
Thanks. There's a follow-up question from Susan. She wants to know if there's a list of the groups who are funded, perhaps a link.
Yeah, if you could just go to nyc.gov/census, I believe it's the partners tab. And it lists all 157 groups that were funded by us. I know Citizens Committee funds groups for doing all kinds of work. So there's also Robin Hood Foundation, New York Community Trust, and each borough president's office also funded organizations. But for NYC Census, we had $19 million, but we had over 500 applicants, and we have funded 157. So there were many very valuable, and I see my colleague Artie just dropped the link in the chat. Thank you, Artie. So a lot of great nonprofits out there that we continue to work with who are out there getting out the census message, whether or not they're formally working with us.
Thanks. And I do see Susan asking another follow-up question, whether this link includes grants from Citizens Committee. It does not, but we can share the link to our website in the chat. And another question from Sharon saying, how are entries tabulated and how are the percentages of returns calculated? What's the baseline?
It's a math question.
The baseline is based, the city actually worked very hard on this. The Department of City Planning did basically in advance of each census, they send a list of like every single address you can imagine. Clearly, that doesn't always capture, and I mean, I mentioned earlier, basements, what might be illegal housing complexes, but they submitted thousands and thousands of addresses of either new developments, if they knew about extra apartments and buildings, and 99% of them were accepted by the Bureau. So when we say 59.8% of New Yorkers have self-responded to the census, that means based on all the addresses that the Census Bureau sent a form to, or a postcard inviting people to the census back in March, how many of those people have actually replied. So that's the baseline. And then as they're submitted either via mail or from my2020census.gov, they have the Bureau has their machine, and truly a non-politicized part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Census Bureau. There's been some appointments at the top that have been a little political lately, but the staff themselves are covered by Title 13. They cannot share anything. They'd go to jail or have a huge fine. So they're on the back end tabulating the responses. They're matching them up to the addresses they send them to, and that's how it's always usually like a day or so behind. But so when you go, you can even go on our website, nyccensus.gov, or sorry, nyc.gov/census, or on the U.S. Bureau, and you can see the response rates, and that's what the baseline is based off of.
Great. So I think we are getting close to time. Are there any other questions, Carla, Naomi, that you want to end on?
I don't see any questions. So unless someone has a burning question, I think we can wrap this up.
All right. So I wanted to give our panel an opportunity to have closing words, and just we're really thankful for all that you do. Aminta?
Okay. A lot has been said. I think, we talked about so many important issues, but I'm just going to keep it really simple. Please go to my2020census.gov and complete your census. Please text every family member and friend that you know, and just make sure that they've completed the census. If anybody has difficulty completing the census, offer yourself up to help them with certain questions. You know, one of the questions we always get is how do you answer the race question? And we have our recommendations for how to do that to ensure that our Caribbean communities are counted. But, you know, just be a resource. I know a lot, we might be preaching to the choir for some of our viewers today, but we can actually make a difference. So let's just mobilize each other to do this very, very important task between now and the next 13 days. We have a short amount of time. This is important. This is pressing. And also don't forget to register to vote. And again, thank you so much, Citizens Committee, for providing this platform, for believing in our work, for believing in the work of small grassroots organizations across New York City, and for giving us this chance to really grow what it is that we're able to do. Thank you.
Yeah, just going to echo that. I think she definitely covered all of it. Please go to my2020census.gov, complete the census, and also register to vote. There's about 45 days, I think, left for the election. So let's go out, get our communities counted and represented on all levels.
Great. Allison?
I might be a broken record here.
Yeah, no, it's good.
My2020census.gov.
That's
yes,
right.
And they say most people need to hear things 3 times before it's in. So we all just said it. Please go to my2020census.gov, and I'll make the personal plea that my colleague Archie put the link about volunteering with us. We'd be so grateful if any of you could hop on the phone for even a half hour with us over the next 2 weeks. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. You guys have great technology. It's been an amazing effort, and you know, we're so close. And there's so much more work to do. So anything that anyone can do, anytime you have to give, please do the census, ask your friends and family, and sign up to join us in the next 2 weeks. 13 days to the end of the census. So 13 days, 10 questions, 10 minutes, 10 years.
Awesome. So I have a few announcements, the things I want to acknowledge. First and foremost, happy Hispanic Heritage Month to all my, Latinx brothers and sisters out there. Talking about identity, being seen is so important. It's really great when we can recognize folks and have our difference be something that we celebrate and embrace. I wanted to recognize census is so important for schools, and today a bunch of New York public school families got some really tough news. So just here with them, be counted because it makes a difference. We have some great events that are coming up. Needing good news, we're going to celebrate on September 29th, I believe it's at 7 p.m. if I'm wrong. We're having our culminating summer sessions event. There's going to be music, there's going to be art, there's going to be great conversation. So check us out at our Citizens Committee website, so citizensnyc.org. And definitely, we are going to make sure that after we finish the census, we're going to start really making sure that everyone's registered to vote and get out there. Our next conversation is going to be about folks' civic duty to get out there to vote. So look for us very soon. That should be on October 1st to be confirmed, but that's what we're looking at. And lastly, fill out the census. You can go to the link that's going to pop up magically on the screen, my2020census.gov. Let's just get this done because we build power when we're counted. So thank you everyone for your participation, for your leadership. Stay hopeful, and we are going to build and be resilient and make sure that New York City is the best that she can be. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.